I want to now turn it over to one of our guest speakers. Jessica Pishko is amazing, and we are incredibly grateful for her joining us today. Jessica graduated with a JD from Harvard Law School and received an MFA from Columbia University. She's working on a project related to the role of sheriffs and policing in the United States. Her journalism is focused on criminal justice, including the connection between mass incarceration and county level politics. And her writing has appeared in publications like The Nation, The Guardian, Esquire, The Rolling Stone. She practiced corporate law for some time, specializing in securities fraud, and represented people on death row and survivors of violence and abuse pro bono.
Okay. Is the next slide ready? Oh, thank you guys. So I just wanted to first thank everyone for being here, and certainly thank the people of TJOC for putting this together. So I just wanted to mostly today talk a little bit about the role of the sheriff generally, and hopefully set some great background for everyone who's curious to see how it will impact what's going on. So in general, I think when you talk about a sheriff, most people are a little bit surprised to hear the word. So the role of the sheriff goes all the way back to England. And, you know, if it seems sort of old-fashioned, it was old-fashioned. You know, in England, most of their duties were tax collection and running a local militia. As the United States formed, the role of sheriff became more popular in general in the South and West, as opposed to the North. So as states began to create their state constitutions, they started writing this job into their state constitutions, which is sometimes why you'll hear sheriffs say that their office is a constitutional office. Currently, at least 40 states have elected sheriffs. There are a few outliers. There are a few counties that do not have elected sheriffs, or that have combined sheriff and police departments. So it can occasionally get a little bit confusing. And a few states, Alaska, Hawaii, and Connecticut among them, they don't have elected sheriffs. They instead have statewide officers who run basically the same functions. And I think for most people here, what is the most important thing to understand is the difference between a police chief and an elected sheriff. So first, a sheriff is elected democratically. So your sheriff in Orange County, Don Barnes, was elected on a ballot like many of your other county officials. Police chiefs are generally appointed usually by a city council or a mayor. Now, why this matters? It matters in that police chiefs are much easier to remove and replace. So when a police chief does something that people don't like, you'll notice that the police chief will pretty quickly be gone and replaced. What you might notice on the contrary is that when an elected sheriff does something that people in the community object to, so for example, jail deaths or officer-involved shooting deaths, it is much harder to replace the sheriff quickly. So often they will say, well, we'll have to wait till the next election. So that's, I think, the most important difference to understand as we sort of move forward and talk about some of these positions, that the sheriff is an elected position with some duties that may overlap with police chiefs, but is always democratically elected. Okay. Thank you. So in general, the duties of a sheriff, so sheriffs generally have three main duties that they carry out. So the first one is overseeing the jail, which includes everything from conditions within the jail, what type of health care people who are housed there may receive, conditions like the use of solitary confinement, how people are housed, how people are fed. So so really all the kind of minutia, how visitation happens. So whether there's in-person visitation or video visitation, whether children are permitted to visit, that's all within the realm of the sheriff, within local jails. And just to kind of clarify, that the local jail is the county facility where people are housed, and this might include folks who are both waiting for their trial. So some people are being housed in a jail facility waiting for their court case to proceed, which means they have not yet been convicted of any crime, right? So they're waiting for their case to proceed, usually because they cannot afford cash bail. The other group of people in a county jail are folks who are serving time, usually in California. I think it's under about 2 to 3 years, in that range. So if someone has a sentence of generally that amount of time, it usually is less than a year. They may be serving some of that time in the county jail. And other folks who are in the county jail also include people who may be having their appeal or going to court. So there's often a lot of people moving in and out of a jail, which is very important right now. The second role for sheriffs is the kind of transportation and management of courthouses. So, I just saw the question. Is the sheriff responsible for prisons? No. So prisons are run by a state authority. So that's a good question. In California, there's the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. They run all of the state prison facilities. Now, again, there can be it can get a little bit confusing because there are people who may be housed at a county jail that are serving state prison sentences, right? So you might have folks who might ordinarily be at a state prison, but they're being housed at a county jail for one reason or another. So it can get a little confusing, but technically, if someone is convicted of a crime for which they must serve a number of years, they will be in a CDCR facility. So one of the second role of sheriffs is transporting people. So this includes people to and from the courthouse. So an important role of sheriffs and their deputies is moving people from the jail to the courthouse, making sure they get there for their hearings, facilitating visits with their attorneys. So this sort of transportation of people is a very important role of the sheriff. And I think one can also see quickly how that is a problem when there's not a lot of oversight, right? So if people are late to their hearings, or they don't get somewhere in time, or they miss the transport to see the judge, like it's a really big problem for folks. The third thing that most sheriffs do is the extent to which they do some policing. So in most places, so if you live in a city, generally you will have city police officers. So let's say you live in Irvine, you would have Irvine police officers who are patrolling the streets and doing sort of what I might call like general patrol duties. I see the question about sheriffs and marshals. I'll talk about it in a second. So sheriffs also do some patrol duties. Most of the time they are either patrolling places that are outside of urban areas. So that might include, in some places that includes parks. Sometimes it includes schools, college campuses. Oftentimes sheriffs are also in charge of student resource officers within schools, so within the school district. I don't know if that's true in Orange County, but in many school districts, it's the county sheriff who runs that program. And then there are also cities, especially in California, that are called contract cities. Los Angeles is an example. There are many cities within Los Angeles County that pay the Los Angeles County Sheriff to essentially act as their police. So in some cases, particularly in smaller cities or cities that may not have the tax revenue to stand up their own police department, the sheriff acts as the patrolling police officer. And then in some places in California, sheriffs also act as coroners. This is sort of an unusual thing that sheriffs do in California. So the coroner is the person who assesses the cause of death of individuals. So they are the person who fills out the death certificate and are sort of in charge of what is sometimes called an inquest. And then I see a few questions. Hold on. I'll try to do. So difference between sheriffs and marshals. Marshals just depend on where you are. So in some places, particularly small towns and particularly towns in the Northeast, they sometimes have what are also like locally elected officers, sometimes called marshals, sometimes called constables, if you've ever heard that word. They are people who do other types of duties. Although you might mean U.S. Marshals. I think this person means U.S. Marshals work for the federal government. They are sort of the, I think what the right word is. They're sort of like the guards and transportation of the federal government, if you're talking U.S. Marshals. Airports, yes. Generally, the sheriff's office has jurisdiction over the airports, although it depends on different places. Okay, yeah, most of that. All right. Thank you, guys. So because the sheriff has kind of a wide-ranging power, but also the kind of power that people often aren't able to really examine. So as all you guys are here to talk about, the problems and conditions within county jails, and I'm sure as many people know, particularly those of you who have friends and family in jails, it is extremely hard for people on the outside to understand what's going on. And so this is where we get to the part where the office seems particularly prone to abuse. So even though the office is an elected position, often the same get elected over and over. So it would be common to have sheriffs who are elected for very long tenures with limited oversight. So while cities may stand up civilian commissions for their police, they may not have it for their sheriff's department. Although I'm sure that's something you guys will talk about later, is kind of the utility of that sort of thing. But often they don't have anyone telling them what to do, except for sometimes the county board of supervisors. The other issue is that because sheriffs are elected, they have different requirements in terms of their professional background. So when a city hires a police chief, they sort of interview people. They might bring in people from out of town. It's common to hire police chiefs from other cities, right? Sheriffs are residents of the county in which they are running. In California, they actually have quite a lot of policing requirements, but it's kind of the difference I tell people between kind of interviewing and picking a CEO and then sort of electing a representative. The people tend to have very different backgrounds. And then, let's see, I'm gonna hop around the slide a little bit. So I was gonna say, because some of the things, the problems with the sheriff's office will have a lot in common with police, right? So that is the excessive force, asset forfeiture. So like police, sheriff deputies, again, tend to use excessive force. They tend not to be disciplined. Like police officers, sheriff deputies have a union, and so they are protected by their union in terms of disciplinary records, in terms of firing and hiring. So I'm sure many of you know or have read articles about how hard it is to fire officers. Sheriff deputies also have these unions that protect their jobs. So it is hard often to fire a deputy for doing something, even if the thing that they've done is quite plainly immoral and in most cases would be completely illegal. Asset forfeiture. So this is sort of a side. This is, I think, less common right now in California, but sheriff's offices can seize property or money, even if you haven't been convicted of a crime yet. Immigration enforcement. I think this is something that many people are thinking a lot about, because jails are a place where many people come in and out. It is also a place where ICE and immigration enforcement happens. So when it's unfortunately the kind of connectedness of immigration and law enforcement is a very deep and sticky web. But I'm happy to go into it as much or as little as people are interested in hearing, but in general, when when people enter the jail, they are generally fingerprinted and fill out a form. And so in every jail across the country, even in California, so California no longer has 287G agreements, that's been eliminated. But in every jail across the country, once you are booked, they take your fingerprints and it's all put into a database called Secure Communities. The Secure Communities database essentially runs everyone's biometric information into basically a big national pile of people. And from that, ICE is able to basically produce large numbers of detainers. So they can produce a list almost immediately of anyone who may have some sort of questionable immigration status. So it's a broad list, right? So it's people who are DACA, people whose visas may have expired, people who are waiting for their interview, people who've been married but didn't fill out their visa application. So it's like a wide range of people that get kind of trapped in this net of secure communities. Influence on state policy. So sheriff associations, much like police, are also very powerful in terms of setting policies. So the California Sheriff's Association is a powerful lobbyist in the state capitol. So this, I think people may not notice this as much, but you may not be aware of this as much, but they basically, every bill that goes through the California Capitol, the state sheriff association can submit a comment. So whether they like this bill, whether they don't like this bill. And I would say it's a pretty fair generalization to say that the state sheriff association pretty much supports every bill that penalizes people more and opposes bills that tend to penalize people less. So, it's not just this sort of individual power, but the collective power of the state association, which is all the elected sheriffs across the state. Sort of on the positive side, sheriffs, because they run jails and also, sort of control both the amount of space in their jail, as well as some of the people coming in, they are able to do some things like early release, alternatives to incarceration, which might include something like diversion programs, cite and release programs. They also have some of the powers to release people out of their own decision-making power. So if this happens, sometimes someone might be at the jail waiting to be booked, and instead they might just get a desk ticket to appear at a different time rather than getting booked into the jail. I'm just checking out do deputy sheriffs enjoy qualified immunity? Yes, all law enforcement officers basically and get to enjoy qualified immunity, just like police do. So you have essentially many of the same problems in terms of, again, abuse of power, abuse of discretion, excessive force, all those same problems you would have with sheriff deputies. It's so much to cover in such a short time, so I'm sorry if I'm talking fast. Who sheriffs the sheriff? So of course, one of the biggest problems with the office of sheriff is they simply do not have a great deal of oversight. So the duties are enshrined in the state constitution. So every single county must have a sheriff. In other words, they can't so while cities can dissolve their police departments, I think this is particularly important, right, to think about right now. While cities can dissolve their police departments, a county cannot opt to dissolve its sheriff's office. So the sheriff is there, whether, in essence, unless you change the state constitution. So they are kind of, if a city dissolves its police department, the sheriff's office will de facto be in charge of the policing for that region. So I think that's kind of a side note that's more important, I think, as people think about defunding. Let's see, do sheriffs who work in contract cities do jail rotations also? That's a really good question. All state constitutions have the sheriffs enshrined in the constitutions. So that's a good question about what deputies do what. And this is actually something I've been looking into. So actually, one of the things that is a bit of a problem is that the deputies who work inside the jail are often the new ones. So it is generally true that sheriff's deputies prefer to be on patrol. That is the preferred place that they want to work. And so what often happens is the deputies who are working inside the jail are either new or have been decided not to be suitable for patrol. And so if you think about it, and you think about conditions inside a jail, that's a problem, right? So you often have people working inside the jail who don't want to be there. And of course, you have people that don't want to be there in a situation in which you have many people who have, right, a great deal of need. I mean, if you are in a jail, you depend on deputies to get to court, to get to the doctor, to get medication you need, to see your family, to know when your release date is. So it's, the deputies really control these people's lives, and often they don't want to be there, which is sort of a horrifying thought. It may not be the job they signed up for. And then to kind of go to California and the importance of the Board of Supervisors, that while in California, elected sheriffs can run the department however they wish. They can make any priorities they want. Many of you have probably seen news about mask wearing ordinances, right? So sheriffs can opt to enforce the ordinance, or they can opt not to enforce the ordinance. It's sort of, kind of both practically and legally impossible to force them to enforce any particular laws. There's actually, unfortunately, very bad Supreme Court precedents that suggest that you can't make sheriff's deputies enforce anything if they don't want to. It's a sort of weird one. And that the Board of Supervisors does get to determine the budget. So in Orange County, the Orange County Board of Supervisors can assess kind of what the budget needs are. They have to approve the budget. And so that gives them some degree of control. In some places, the Board of Supervisors has more control over it than others. What tends to happen is the board often just approves the sheriff's budget as it comes up. So the sheriff says, I need X amount, and the board says, okay, and then they just approve it and they don't really look into it. Like, they don't always, their receipts, right? In a normal world, you have to sort of show your receipts to justify your money. Okay, so wait, I'm looking at questions. Since sheriffs are elected, who can remove them from offices in case of gross negligence? That's a good question. Not many people. So one of the greatest challenges for sheriffs, not just in California, but around the country, is the difficulty it is to remove them outside of an election. Most places have a few different ways in which sheriffs are removed. So some states allow governors to do it. Some states allow it to happen if the sheriff is arrested and prosecuted. And some places someone just suggested you can trigger a recall election. In California, you can trigger a recall election of a sheriff, but the conditions are quite high. They have a very high standard for which they have to meet. And for this reason, it very rarely happens. In theory, the state attorney general can oversee and possibly remove it. To my knowledge, this has never happened. So it's not clear whether that can happen. So this is sort of where we get to the root of the problem, is that sheriffs can decide how they maintain their jail, how their deputies do their business, but nobody's really saying, hey, you're not supposed to do that. And someone just mentioned this Supreme Court ruling, right? And that's why the Supreme Court made that ruling, I'm not sure, but that's a really good example, right? That the sheriff was like, well, we are doing the best we can, I guess, and we have all these things, and nobody can tell us how to do it, right? No one gets to sort of walk in and assess like how they're doing things. So I agree that this is a huge problem. And unfortunately, there is not a lot of good law. The Supreme Court just said really bad law, so it's even worse. But there was never a very particularly good law for this. All right, I think I'm ready for the next slide. So, no office is less accountable or more reliable in producing scandal. One of the issues in the sheriff's office that particularly in California, historically has been the kind of scandals generated. I mean, this is a problem in many places where sheriffs commit outright crimes. There are some things, I think, different buckets, right? There's sort of the bucket of things where sheriffs are actually committing crimes that if you or I committed, that we would be certainly arrested, right? So there are certain things like if I didn't, I would certainly be arrested for committing a crime. So these include things like bribery or sending deputies to like shake down people they don't like. Those are things I'm not allowed to do. And then there's sort of the other range of things which are like perfectly permissible within the sheriff's office. So that includes things like, how is the jail maintained? Are they required to keep a certain standard inside of the jail, etc.? So I think that pretty much concludes. Is there another slide? I don't want to go into other people's stuff. Okay, excellent.
So next we have a poll question for you. I think the question will get posted in the chat box. And so we are asking all of you to please check all that apply. Which of the following statements is or are true? So after hearing Jessica Pishko kind of walk us through the history of sheriff's power and duties, we'd like for you all to answer this question. We have sheriffs have the power to influence state policy. So that is true. As Jessica Pishko mentioned, oftentimes this power is exercised through sheriff associations and deputy unions. Sheriffs are responsible for overseeing local jails and maintaining jail conditions. This is also true. Some sheriffs act as coroners. This is also true. This is actually true in Orange County. Sheriff Don Barnes also serves as the county coroner. Most sheriffs are appointed. This is not true. Most sheriffs are elected. There are some sheriffs that are appointed, but a vast majority of them are elected. And last but not least, sheriffs have the power to cite and release people. That is also true. And I think we can go on to the next slide. So now we're going to talk about Orange County and how this plays out in OC. So like the next few slides is going to be a lot of kind of like foundational knowledge that will be key to having as we move forward with the series. So we'll talk a little bit about OCSD, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, the Orange County jails, other key stakeholders like the public defender, the district attorney, judges, and the probation department. And then we will talk about the Orange County Board of Supervisors. So this is me. I introduced myself at the very beginning. I'll be handling the next few slides. So as I mentioned, I am a founding member and steering committee member of Transforming Justice Orange County. My full-time job, I work with the American Civil Liberties Union as the Jails Conditions and Policy Coordinator. My work in that capacity includes examining conditions of confinement in Orange County jails and advocating on behalf of incarcerated people and their loved ones. And my work centers the idea that we need transformation and transformative justice instead of punishment and aims to promote divesting from the carceral system and investing in people and community. So OCSD. So the Orange County Sheriff's Department is actually the 5th largest sheriff department in the country. OCSD operates the 9th largest jail system in the United States, 2nd largest in California, 2nd to LA County, which actually operates the largest jail system in the world. The department is comprised of 24 divisions and over 3,900 employees, including sworn personnel and non-sworn personnel. This came up earlier. In addition to operating the jails, OCSD also patrols unincorporated areas in OC and 13 cities. So cities that contract with the department for patrol services, cities that do not have their own police department. OCSD also provides courthouse security for all superior courts in OC, and the department accounts for approximately 20% of the county's general fund, meaning that it accounts for a large portion of the money that Board of Supervisors have complete control over, money that could be utilized for other agencies like the Social Services Agency or the Healthcare Agency. A lot of that money is going to OCSD. Then we have Sheriff-Coroner Don Barnes. So Sheriff-Coroner Barnes was elected November of 2018, and he was sworn in early 2019. His entire career in law enforcement has been in Orange County. He served as the former undersheriff under Sheriff Sandra Hutchins. She actually endorsed him when he was running for sheriff. The position of sheriff in California, well, actually, I don't know if it's specific to California, but it's definitely the case in OC. They serve 4-year terms. One of the things that was particularly interesting about the race for sheriff in 2018 was that for the first time in 40 years, there was a runoff. So prior to 2018, for 40 years, we had incumbents either running unopposed or running against other people, but winning the elections outright in the primary, meaning that in the primary, they secured 50% of the vote plus 1 vote, meaning that there wasn't a need for a runoff. And that had been the case for 4 decades. In 2018, there was, record numbers in terms of people that turned out for the election. And for the first time in a long time, the race was actually a contested race. So, we hope that that continues to remain the case where it's not, the person that has been occupying this role just continues to, run business as usual. And we can go to the next slide. So former sheriff-coroners in Orange County, some of you may be familiar with Sandra Hutchins. So Sandra Hutchins was appointed as sheriff-coroner by the Board of Supervisors in June of 2008. So it wasn't an election year, so she was appointed because her predecessor, Mike Corona, had actually resigned after being indicted by a federal grand jury on 7 counts of public corruption. So he resigned January 2008. Sandra Hutchins was appointed. Ultimately, Mike Corona was convicted of witness tampering for attempting to sway an ex-aide to lie for him in a federal investigation of fraud. And he was ultimately sentenced to 66 months in prison. The department continued to be plagued with controversies and misconduct under Hutchins. That's when the informant scandal came to light. There was also an escape of 3 people from the jails in 2016. There were several people that died in the jails under her administration. And actually during that time, the ACLU actually published a report. We're going to be sending you all the link following the webinar that where we interviewed people in custody and formerly incarcerated individuals about conditions in the jails. And so we learned of the inhumane conditions, and that was something, you know, that's something that plagues jails everywhere and all of the time, right? Like jails by their very nature are punitive places and places that inflict harm on people. But one of the things that we want to stress is that under Hutchins, there was a lot of heat that was coming to OCSD at the time, and she decided to retire and announced her retirement in 2018. So really, for like the last year of her tenure, Barnes became the face of the department, and in many ways, you know, like that helped his campaign for sheriff as well. We can go to the next slide. So the Orange County jails. So I mentioned the Orange County jails. It's the 9th largest jail system in the country. Prior to COVID-19, the average daily population of the jails in 2019 specifically was around 5,400 people. This is actually lower than what it was in previous years, because in July of 2019, the department shut down the James A. Music facility after they ended their contract with ICE. So because of that, the numbers also went down. Prior to 2019, the average daily population, which is the ADP, so you all will hear me say ADP moving forward, was a little bit over 6,000 people. Annual bookings prior to 2019 were about 60,000. In 2019, OCSD booked more than 55,000 people into the jail system. More than half of those individuals, people that, you know, were in the jails, had actually not been sentenced. They were still pre-trial. They were still fighting their cases. Many of them remaining in custody due to the inability to post bail. So, you know, being confined to a cage, having to fight their case from the inside. Currently, things are a bit different because of COVID-19 and because of a lot of the organizing and public pressure to release people, especially people that are medically vulnerable or people that were close to wrapping up their jail sentences. So because of that, the average daily population dropped down to about 2,800 earlier this year. In April, the ADP was 2,800. After the bail order was rescinded, that number started picking back up. So the most recent figure that we've gotten from OCSD is that there is roughly 3,300 people in the jails, and roughly 60% of those folks have not been convicted of the charges that they are facing. Most of the people in the Orange County jail system are people of color. Latinx and Black folks make up 63% of the jail population. And you all can see the significant disparity when we compare the population that Black folks account for in the jail. So 9% of people in the jails are Black, while Black folks only account for 1.5% of the county's population. With Latinx folks account for 54% of people behind bars, while accounting for 34% of the county's population. Another thing to keep in mind, and we're gonna dive deep into all of this during webinar number 2, which is gonna focus on the Orange County jails. But I wanted to make sure that I uplifted this today as well, that 30% of the people currently incarcerated in Orange County have unmet mental health needs. These are folks who have mental health diagnoses and that have open mental health cases in the jails, right? So again, we alluded to like people's needs are being criminalized, and that's why people are winding up behind bars. The top charge for Orange County jail bookings in 2019 was for DUI, alcohol, and drugs. So 14% of the bookings were DUI, alcohol, and drugs. The top 3 home cities for people booked into Orange County jails are cities that are over policed and cities that are over criminalized. Communities of color, that is the cities of Santa Ana, Anaheim, and Garden Grove. And you all can see the percentage on the slide. And then just also mention the Supreme Court ruling. So the National ACLU, the ACLU of Southern California, and a private law firm actually filed a class action lawsuit against OCSD, requesting that medically vulnerable individuals be released, and also requesting conditions relief. The release of medically vulnerable people was not granted, but the judge did issue a court order that granted significant conditions relief, including, requiring OCSD to ensure that folks were able to social distance, requiring them to test people that had COVID-19 symptoms, proper quarantine of individuals exposed to the virus, ensuring that people had access to cleaning supplies, masks, and other, PPE. And then Barnes, appealed it, and he decided to go to the US Supreme Court to request a stay of the court order. And that was granted yesterday by the Supreme Court in a 5-4 vote, which means that for the time being, that court order is no longer in effect. And we don't know whether or how the Sheriff's Department is going to change its behavior, because although conditions remain to be terrible, there were some improvements that had been made in response to that court order. So we are extremely concerned right now that some of those minor changes will no longer be implemented. Next slide. We also mentioned, right, oversight, like who shares the sheriffs. There's very little oversight of OCSD, of Sheriff-Coroner Don Barnes. But as just alluded, there are some people that have a certain level of authority or ability to provide some oversight. The Board of Supervisors is required to supervise all conduct of county officers. Feedback. There we go. The Board of Supervisors, like I said, are required to supervise all conduct of county officers, including the sheriff. However, they are prohibited against interfering with the sheriff's investigative duties and the way that they conduct their statutory duties. But again, right, the Board of Supervisors control the county budget, and through that avenue, could encourage or influence the department to make changes. I know that a lot of the work that we have been doing as TJOC, and actually like prior to COVID-19, we had a presence at the Board of Supervisor meetings, and more often than not, we were like told by some of the supervisors that they couldn't control anything that we were asking of them, which we know is not the case, right? We know that they are able to invest in other systems that would reduce the number of people being locked up. But the BOS is one example, and Rose is going to chat a little bit more about this later today. Then there is the Office of Independent Review. OIR was created by the Board of Supervisors back in 2008, and this was in direct response to the murder of an incarcerated individual at the Theo Lacey facility in 2006. In 2006, an incarcerated person was murdered by other people in custody. The DOJ actually got involved in opening an investigation, and the department, came under huge scrutiny. So in response to that, the Board of Supervisors created this office. And at the time, the focus of the office was to provide oversight strictly of OCSD and to investigate, I'm sorry, let me pull up because I don't want to misstate what it was at the outset. Um, so they were to monitor, assist, and oversee the department, especially regarding internal misconduct investigations and investigations into deaths in custody, and also serious injury to people in custody, so excessive use of force. That was its very specific purview. Then the Board of Supervisors for years have considered potentially dismantling that office by not continuing to fund it. So, they've been very critical of the office. The office itself came under a lot of scrutiny when the informant scandal made national headlines, because it was not something that OIR was on top of, basically. And then in 2015, while there was conversation to dismantle the office as a whole, the Board of Supervisors ultimately expanded its purview. And now, in addition to providing oversight of the Sheriff's Department, OIR is also tasked with providing oversight of the District Attorney's Office, the Public Defender's Office, probation, and social services. And we're talking about an office with no more than 3 staff members. The office, the position of executive director, was vacant for some time. Most recently, I think it was in May, if I'm not mistaken, the Board of Supervisors appointed the newest executive director. His name is Sergio Perez. And Sergio now has, and this has been a feature of the office since its inception, that the ED of the office has an attorney-client relationship with the heads of every department and agency that it is tasked with overseeing, right? So that brings up like an inherent conflict of interest. Like the value of having that, or like what people have said, is that it then allows the ED of OIR to access internal documents, and that there's more of a willingness from the heads of the department to actually work with OIR. The downside is the inherent conflict of interest that arises when the person that's tasked with providing oversight has an attorney-client relationship with the people that it is overseeing. And then another downside to the way that OIR is structured right now is that the office does not have subpoena power. So it does not have the authority to like request and like legally have to receive certain documents from OIR. That's something that could be changed, and the folks that have the power to do that are the Board of Supervisors. Next slide. Then there is the Board of State and Community Corrections. This is a statewide agency, the BSCC. This agency was established in 2012, and it publicizes regulations for adult and juvenile jails. There's the Title 15 regulations, which dictate like conditions related policies and processes of the department. And then Title 24 regulations, which lay out things that need to be abided to, like it's specific to the physical structure of facilities. The BSCC also conducts regular inspections of the jails. However, these inspections are pre-planned and coordinated with the department. So it gives the department enough time to prep for these visits. And it's something that we've actually heard from incarcerated people have told us, that anytime that these types of inspections happen, the week leading up to the inspection, people, folks that work in custody are tasked with like cleaning the jails. People are essentially threatened not to try to flag anyone down during these inspections. And another downside is that the BSCC itself doesn't interview or engage with incarcerated people during their inspection. So it's a very one-sided view that they're getting of the jails. They are only in communication with jail administration. So again, very limited in terms of what they can do. After they conduct these inspections, they publish their findings. And these reports are available on their website. The other downside is even when they find that jails are not in compliance with Title 15 or Title 24 regulations, they have no legal authority to force the jails or the department to make changes, right? So it's this kind of like this report that's there, but once it's there, it's like, what happens next? Who actually is going to make sure that this is implemented or enforced? They also develop standards for the selection and training of local corrections and probation officers, and they administer public safety related grant funding. So a lot of the like the Prop 47 funding, and other proposition like other funding, they also oversee funding for jail construction. Again, something that we'll talk more about during webinar 2. And another downside of this board is that it is heavily comprised of former law enforcement individuals. So I think the board is, if I'm not mistaken, it's a 13-member board, and only 2 out of the 13 individuals are community folks. It's actually representatives from the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. Everyone else is either former law enforcement, either like Sheriff's Department, Police Department, or probation. Next slide. Then there is the California Attorney General, the Department of Justice. So the AG has direct supervision over every DA and sheriff in all matters pertaining to the duties of their respective offices. However, they've done very, very little to hold, I guess at this point, District Attorney Todd Spitzer or Sheriff-Coroner Barnes. The AG can require that the DA and sheriff make reports concerning investigations, detection, prosecution, and punishment of crime in their respective jurisdictions. We know that that hasn't gone anywhere, at least in Orange County. So the current Attorney General is Javier Becerra. Prior to that, it was Kamala Harris. And both of them did a horrible job of providing oversight of the investigation into the informant scandal. I mean, they essentially failed at every single level of that investigation, right? When it comes to the sheriff's own policies and conduct, the DA conspiring with the sheriff, and then Spitzer basically putting out a BS review a few weeks after the fact. The grand jury also had a weak investigation into the matter. And at the end of the day, the AG's office, both the current and former office, essentially swept it under the rug and failed to publicize anything about the investigation, including why it was closed. And then there's the Federal Department of Justice. So I mentioned earlier that in 2008, when OIR was created, it was in direct response to the murder of an individual. His name was John Chamberlain. And so at that time, the DOJ opened an investigation into conditions in the jails. They also opened this investigation in 2008. And in 2014, in early 2014, the DOJ issued a letter it was basically like had some result of the investigation to that point. And they identified a number of concerns and recommendations involving use of force, supervision practices, medical care, and mental health care. And the investigation continued. We actually were in touch with the DOJ, and we knew that they were going in and they were actually interviewing people in custody. And then out of nowhere, at the end of 2019, we learned that the investigation, an 11-year investigation, was closed. And the letter that was published after they made that announcement was, it was 2 paragraphs essentially saying, we trust that OCSD will continue to implement changes. And that was it. And that was that. And like beyond that, they haven't said anything. And we know through our communications and through our relationships with people in the jails that things continue to be just as horrible as they were back in 2008. Next slide. I think 2 of the most key pieces in terms of, who provides oversight is the media and the community, right? Prior to work kind of like community work with regard to conditions in the jails, the only people, obviously, like folks that are incarcerated and their loved ones, that were like raising these concerns. But OC Weekly, which no longer is in effect, specifically Scott Moxley, covered so much of what was transpiring in the jails for years. And really it was through that that I think people then started getting more involved and actually, trying to address what was happening behind bars. Other local outlets that tend to cover what happens in the jails is Voice of OC. Then at a national level, we have the Appeal, Orange County Register, local. They do some coverage, not the greatest coverage. Oftentimes, I think it can also uplift a perspective that is not one that we as TJOC agree with. And then there is ProPublica. But I think the most important piece is the community piece, right? Everyone that joined today, everyone, folks that are in custody, family members, like it is on us, right? Through public pressure, through organizing, for folks that are able to vote come election time, for all these things to come together, and really expose what is happening, and demand justice and demand more for people that are impacted. And as TJOC, we are an abolitionist group. So, we envision a world where there aren't any jails, where there isn't a position of a sheriff. But we also recognize that there are so many people in custody right now whose lives are completely controlled by these individuals. And because of that, we cannot stress enough the importance of getting involved, and joining campaigns that are ongoing. And I think we can go to the next slide. The next few slides are going to be very quick. It's just kind of like identifying other key people in the county. So we have judges. Judges are people that can issue arrest warrants. They determine the bail that is set on individuals that are arrested. And they also have the ability to release individuals on their own recognizance. They are responsible for arraignments and can dismiss charges. They preside over trial proceedings and determine sentencing. They are also responsible, this is a very important piece, for granting or denying pretrial diversion or probation and setting the conditions of those things. And they can issue warrants to rearrest people who are on probation, and can also modify, revoke, or terminate a person's probation. And the presiding judge of the Orange County Superior Court is Judge Kirk Nakamura. Then we have District Attorney Todd Spitzer, who is, just to say very bluntly, a horrible person. He was elected to serve as District Attorney November of 2018, same time when Barnes was. Prior to serving as DA, he served as an Orange County Board of Supervisor, and before that was a state assembly member. I actually decided to add a quote. This is something that I think was covered in the OC Register, that happened recently, just to show folks the type of person that Todd Spitzer is. So TJOC, OC Protest, OC Justice Initiative have been working closely with the Epps family. So there was an individual who was arrested during a mental health crisis, and he was in custody since 2019. Bail set incredibly high, and we started working together. There was a rally that happened. There was, public pressure, petitions that were being shared. And Todd Spitzer gave comment to OC Register, essentially saying that this young Black man was lucky to be alive, that the police was in every right to basically shoot him. And instead of taking that back, after it's published in print and people can read this, he actually shows up to the person's court hearing and doubles down on that, reiterates this in front of the young man, in front of his family, in front of like community members. So again, just very like, I feel like people in Orange County, specifically like Sheriff Barnes and DA Spitzer, are very emboldened. Like people have gotten away with so much that they really believe that they are above it all. That there is nothing that they can do that is going to lead to change in the county. Next slide. And there is the public defender's office. So the interim public defender is Martin Schwarz. A former head PD Sharon Petrosino actually retired in July of 2020. So the Board of Supervisors appointed Martin Schwarz to serve as interim PD. And as interim PD, he is now responsible for overseeing more than 180 public defenders who represent people that are in custody that are unable to afford private representation. And then we have the probation department. Chief Probation Officer Steven Stentman is the head of that office. He supervises about 23,000, or the office supervises about 23,000 adult and youth on court-ordered probation or on diversion programs. Probation officers are responsible for producing sentencing reports and making recommendations to the courts. And the probation department is also responsible for overseeing the juvenile jail in the county and also the youth camps and youth reporting centers. So now we are going to have another poll question. And this question is really a trick question, because I think the more that we talk about it, the more that we recognize the limitations of any oversight of, of the sheriff. But the question before you all is, who cannot hold the Orange County Sheriff accountable? And I guess in many ways, it sounds like, that many of these people are really limited in the type of oversight that they can provide. So we'll wait a few more seconds to let other people chime in. Right, we know constituents, right? It is, we in many ways are the ones that can hold the sheriff accountable through public pressure, through organizing, some of the things that we talked about. The Board of Supervisors have, a level of oversight that they can provide, particularly when it comes to controlling the department budget, right? Then there's the Attorney General, the Office of Independent Review, and the U.S. Department of Justice. The public defender was the response that we're looking for, while recognizing that there are many limitations to some of the other entities as well. And we can go to the next slide.
We actually have some time for questions and answers, Daisy, until 7:40. So if there's any questions for Daisy and Jessica, please put them in the chat, and we'll have some time to interact with each other.
And I'm going to bring up some that were previously added. So we had a question of, was there anything in particular that accounted for the exceptionally large turnout and runoff in 2018?
What was that? Sorry, I totally missed the question.
Was there anything in particular that accounted for the exceptionally large turnout and runoff in 2018?
I think a lot of it really has to do with a lot of the organizing that started happening, a lot of the work that started happening with regard to conditions in the jails. It's not something that was happening. I feel like there's always been a lot of folks that were targeting OCSD, specifically when they were running the detention centers. So back before 2019, OCSD had a contract with ICE. And two out of the 5 county jails were also used to house undocumented folks. So there was a lot of pressure on OCSD from that angle, but there wasn't that much when it came to people that were locked up facing criminal charges. And that's something that I think, started changing about 2017. There was a lot more public pressure. There was a lot more attention that was being paid. And I think that had a lot to do with, a larger turnout. The person that was running against, there were 3 people in that race. It was, I believe his name was Dave Harrington, which is a council member in Irvine, if I'm not mistaken. No?
Another
Yeah,
city.
he used to be our mayor,
Oh, Aliso Viejo, I believe it was.
Aliso Viejo.
Thank you, Lulu and Michelle. And then Duke Nguyen. Duke Nguyen was actually a DA in LA County, and the runoff was ultimately between Duke and Don Barnes. But again, I think just a testament to a lot of the public pressure and organizing work.
Thank you. We had a question from, do we know the percentage of Muslim/Arab American population in the OC jails?
I don't believe that we have that data, but it's something that we can request and share with the group.
Thank you, Daisy. That would be very helpful for us to sort of mobilize our community.
Definitely, Lulu. We'll look into it and we'll circle back.
Perfect. How did OC get the attention of the U.S. Supreme Court?
Jesse,
I was like, that's a good question.
I don't know, so I'll turn it over to Jess.
Oh, I was going to say, so, there's a lot of things that are, also I wanted to tell people in the chat, I clarified the question on the removal of sheriffs. I apologize. Orange, it varies by county, so it's important to know that this is determined by your county charter. So I just wanted to clarify that it's the Orange County charter that would determine your recall election process. My understanding, what's bad and shocking about that opinion was that the court didn't need to rule on it at all, and they would not normally do so. So because it was an unsigned opinion, we don't really know why they took the case, nor why they decided it was important to issue a ruling. This is in my opinion. In my opinion, it was more related to the politics of more related to Republican politics and a desire, because the Supreme Court has been taking cases like this that tend to favor the Trump administration. And so that was that is kind of what I assumed. There was really, the thing to be upset about is there was no reason for the Supreme Court to do anything. They could have simply not reviewed the case and let the injunction stand. So that's sort of my opinion on that.
Thank you. Was the BSCC established by AB 109?
Yes, it was shortly following AB 109 realignment, where for folks that might not be familiar with AB 109, due to extreme overcrowding in the prison system, AB 109 was signed into law by then Governor Brown. And what it did is for folks that were being convicted of non-serious, non-sexual, non-violent crimes, rather than completing their sentences in CDCR in the prison system, they were now completing their sentences in the county jail system.
Thank you for that. How does our DA organizationally relate to Sheriff Barnes?
Can the person, I'm not getting the organizationally. So the DA prosecutes individuals, but I'm not understanding the question.
They certainly don't report to each other, I think, if that's the question. They're both elected positions, with power, although it's a fair question to think, because if you have people who, if you've been denied bail, so the process, I mean, the way it would generally work, if you are arrested, the prosecutor will generally decide what to charge you with, and that will assess what your bail is set at. And then what then happens is, if you cannot make that bail, or if they decide there is no bail, then you would be transferred to the jail pending your trial, in which case the sheriff is sort of then in charge. But technically speaking, so this is actually a bit of an interesting sticky wicket. So technically the sheriff does not really assess whether or not a person is eligible for bail. I think this is the question I think this is what this question is getting at. The sheriff does not assess the eligibility for bail. Sometimes sheriffs can opt to do things within the jail that may be an alternative to incarceration, or maybe different than what the prosecutor does. Is that, I hope that makes sense for whoever asked that question. It's a bit, it is sort of tricky, like, because once you are, and the problem is, of course, for an individual, is once you are inside the jail, you are sort of stuck with whatever rules the sheriff has. Oh, I see. Well, someone put a good answer about the investigative unit investigating in-custody deaths housed in the DA's office. I'll also point out that because Barnes is also the coroner, if someone dies within the custody of the sheriff, Barnes is also the person who assesses the cause of death of that individual. So he does not do the physical autopsy, but he will sign the death certificate. And there was a bit of in I think San Joaquin County, the sheriff was regularly signing, assessing that certain kinds of deaths were accidents when they were plainly not accidents, right? So this sort of determination of like, was it an accidental death, or was it caused by excessive force? So that is certainly a thing that can happen.
Yeah, and what ultimately happened in San Joaquin County is the Board of Supervisors actually voted to split the office. So the sheriff no longer serves as coroner. They've now created a separate office for coroner. So that's something that could happen in Orange County. I think it was in 2019 that Senator Pan from Sacramento had authored a bill that would have split the offices in the state of California, but it only applied to general counties, and Orange County is the charter county. So even if it would have passed, it wouldn't have, changed things in OC, but I think it would have definitely highlighted that in an ideal situation, these offices, aren't under the same individual.
Thank you for that. The next question is, do oversight bodies add power to the sheriff's department in the long run?
Ooh, that's a great question. That brings up, right, the non-reformist reforms versus like reformist reforms, and thinking about thinking about how some of these offices like further legitimize and further and also lead to like more financial investment in, the carceral system as a whole. So I think that's, that's definitely an important conversation to be had. I know in places like LA County, there's civilian oversight, but in many ways, a lot of people regard that still as a reformist reform, like something that still, continues to funnel money into the system. And then there are, other folks that think that there is some added value, at least to the extent that these types of groups or boards can address some of the challenges that people in custody are facing and grappling with every day.
That's a good question. What are examples? I should have noted this for context. What are the examples when they worked out for justice? I'm going to skip that one for a moment until I find the context of that question. What's the first step towards abolition? You mentioned that the sheriff cannot be dissolved because it's established in the state constitution. So would constitutional amendment be the first approach, or be the right approach?
That's a really, really good question. I think that there are, well, I guess one, I don't want to speak for all like defund and abolition movements as a whole, because I'm sure many people have different ways to go about it. So I really, really don't want to like speak as a whole. I would, in my view, I think Daisy sort of brought this up very nicely when she talked about reforms that diminish the power as opposed to reforms that seek accountability through further funding and more officers, right? So sometimes departments like sheriff departments will want to build a new jail, like the Salvador Orange County, build a new jail that's going to be nicer, under the idea that the facility is old and the new jail will be much nicer and it'll provide better services. So in many cases, I think the first step is sort of recognizing, I think, as Daisy said, the non-reform reforms for what they are, that they're demanding more money and power and the capacity to hold more people. So I think that's one, really important thing, is to diminish the sort of, sometimes we call it the sort of the market for beds in the jail. If you diminish the ability to hold people and the amount of space to hold people, you will reduce their ability, right? So that's a sort of steps towards abolition. I mean, I do acknowledge that it's not eliminating the jail or eliminating the department. So it's that. And I think other measures like reducing size of patrols, reducing the size of the office, reducing the number of people on the street, basically reducing the capacity to do harm is another really important step, which I think is a good one that people can take now. And I know that that's, it's extremely difficult, because I think it's tempting to want to get rid of the office. I mean, my greater concern with passing a constitutional amendment is getting rid of the office, is that there would simply be a new office to take its place that would run what is currently there. But I don't mean by that to justify the existence of sheriffs or jails, right? I think we all want jails. We don't want jails, but the first thing I think is to really look at what they do and what they're spending on. One great thing that people can look at is look at what the sheriff's office spends their money on. So do they buy like a lot of gizmos, like drones and cars and tanks? So there's like a great deal of sort of equipment, right, that they sort of buy. Arguments that they need more staff. So for example, they might say, well, people are getting hurt because we don't have enough staff to right? We don't have enough staff to take care of everyone, but do they need more staff, or do we need to have less people in jail? And I think right now is a great moment where many people have reduced their jail population, and that I think is a very strong argument to say that none of those people should have been there in the first place. To sort of point that out. I think the instinct of many reformers is to throw more money at the problem, like more training, more officers, more security cameras, etc., which I think is the thing that, as abolitionists, we want to avoid, right? We want to move away from throwing more money at the problem and saying we don't need that, right? We need other services, not more jails or better jails.
Thank you for that. And I know that we'll be, through the course of other workshops, having some more about ideas of abolition and ways to alternatives to incarceration, and as well as the follow the money. It talks a bit about that too. But thank you, Jessica, for that information. And definitely, it is a complex question. And I made a note that we'll make sure to include some abolition material in our follow-up email. Okay, we'll be having another Q&A shortly after this. We are going to be hopping into the Board of Supervisors.
Awesome. And it is my pleasure to introduce Rose Ochoa. Rose left a 12-year career as a business management consultant to pursue racial, gender, sexual, and environmental justice and explore their expression through aerial and circus performance art. They are a queer, non-binary, non-monogamous advocating for equality and abolition. They are a founding and steering committee member of Transforming Justice Orange County. And I'll turn it over to you, Rose.
Thank you for that, Daisy. So we're going to be covering a little bit about Board of Supervisors. So wanting to know, who are the Board of Supervisors and what is their role? So the Board of Supervisors oversees the management of county government. They have legislative, executive, and like quasi-judicial roles and activities that they play. Most of their legislative and executive activities are conducted at their regular public meetings that are held in Santa Ana at the Hall of Administration. But their legal matters, they actually majoritarily handle in closed sessions. Next slide. So you want to know who's your supervisor. Most of you, if you're here, you're wanting to become more involved and aware of who's your supervisor and what is the power and authority that they have in Orange County. Two main things to note of our upcoming November election. Andrew Doe is actually up for re-election for the Board of Supervisors seat. So that's one thing to be aware of. Also, Michelle Steele is running for Congress, so running against Harley Ruda. So another election to keep an eye out for, depending on where you live, what district you're in. And the other thing to note is of these supervisors, there is only one Democrat, which is Doug Chafee. So, based on the politics as we've been talking about, that we do have more work to do as we start to move people's opinions away from money and towards compassion of community. Next slide. So what are the authorities of the Board of Supervisors? They have a legislative action in which they can issue resolutions, orders, and ordinances. One of these ordinances that they put out was, as Daisy had mentioned, the Office of Independent Review that had been created in 2008 to review Orange County Sheriff's Department's internal investigations into the in-custody deaths, as well as many complaints of employee misconduct. That eventually got expanded in 2015. The Board of Supervisors amended the ordinance to expand the Office of Independent Review to include the district attorney, the public defender, the probation department, and the social services agency. So expanding their responsibilities, their scope, their purpose, although not giving them more funding. So as was mentioned, the Office of Independent Review has gone through flux after the last couple of years of being vacant. It has recently been, Sergio Perez has been put in place, but they're the only one working in that office. So to have this large responsibility, but only one person, also, they unfortunately do not have subpoena power. So another thing to be looking into. With regards to the quasi-judicial, it is a good thing to note of the fact that the Board of Supervisors can settle claims. One of these claims that they ended up settling was having Orange County pay nearly $300,000 to a former jail nurse who was prevented from providing medical care to an incarcerated person. Jennifer Westfield said she was threatened by a deputy to stay quiet about the incarcerated person she found barely conscious in the shower. So the Board of Supervisors received that lawsuit and decided to settle the claim and to pay off Jennifer Westfield. So it's an interesting thing to be looking at of how the Board of Supervisors decides what the priorities are. As an executive side, they can decide what are the priorities. how do they control the budgets of the different departments that they oversee, as well as the county budget entirely. So the board controls an almost $1 billion discretionary budget. So this is an incredible amount. I mean, you think of Orange County and all that it encompasses and all this money. And so always the question is how do they end up allocating those funds? What do they prioritize? Next slide. So as we've seen over the last couple of years since 2016, the discretionary budget has increased by $162.4 million. So once again, what are these increases? Who is getting that additional money? Next slide. So as we can see here, I don't know, some of you may have seen this article before from the Voice of OC, had this wonderful slide showing very clearly who the Board of Supervisors prioritized. So the Sheriff's Department budget since 2009 to now has increased by over $100 million. And yet the Healthcare Agency and Social Services Agency have both decreased by 18%. Noting the fact that these discretionary funds that the Orange County Board of Supervisors has control over, Sheriff's Department and the DA are included in the public protection funding bucket. So we wanted to take a note of that, of like, as we look at what do the Board of Supervisors look, especially since we are coming up on their budget review. The Sheriff's Deputies Union is the largest funder of county election campaigns. So to some of the conversation with regards to politics and money, we can see that the Sheriff's Deputy Union does pay a lot into these county elections. I believe we have a poll question next. Beautiful. The OC Board of Supervisors allocates most of the county's discretionary fund, approximately $1 billion to, feels like this one should be pretty simple. It should be a different answer, but okay, so correct. Public protection. Next slide. So the board allocates most of the county's discretionary funding to public protection. And luckily you'll get these slides after this meeting, so you can look at them a little bit larger, since I know those numbers are small, but it does show of how much money actually goes, and of, as we were just walked through, of the different authorities and areas that the Sheriff's Department handles. Does this actually make sense that they should be having this amount of money prioritized to them? So how can you take action? So the first off, I think this is the thing that like everybody always says, contact your supervisor. So messaging them, although they are driven by money, they are also driven by vote. Since this is an elected position, Board of Supervisors will listen to their constituents so long as they know that they will not be voted back in. Next slide. So making sure to note that your voice matters. So if possible, attend Board of Supervisor meetings. I know that is hard. The regular meetings are every other Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. They sometimes go till, afternoon, mid-afternoon, which makes it very difficult for anybody who is working a regular Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 type job. And this is done on purpose. This is, how are you supposed to hear the voices of your constituents when these meetings are at these times. The next coming Board of Supervisors meeting is August 11th, so that's next week. Another thing to note is, especially during this time of the pandemic and with the Black Lives Matter movement, the Orange County Board of Supervisors decided to pass that on August 11th is Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. So of those of us in this space that we were talking about, Care Not Cages, you know, we have been speaking up about police brutality and the Sheriff's Department, the violence, the negligence that they have inflicted on the community. So if you're able to come out, you know, I know that OC, No Justice, No Peace, will be assisting in rallying people together. So if you're able to come out, please come out. Another important dates to note with regards to the Board of Supervisors is September 1st and 2nd is when they'll be reviewing their Orange County budget. If you'd like to participate in helping to create a people's budget, please complete the survey. So there is a survey at peoplesbudgetoc.org/take-action to show your opinion of what matters to you. Where would you want that $1 billion in discretionary funds to be prioritized? So if you have time, please take that survey. If you have already taken that survey, thank you. Please share it with a friend, pass it along. And we have that survey available in multiple languages. The other note is sending a public comment. So of the note with regards to the public comments, those messages that go to response@ocgov.com do go out to actually all the supervisors. So you can always send your messages to there. And then if it lines up with a regular meeting, they'll include those as a part of the minutes. If this is a nice option in case you're not able to attend in person, especially right now during this pandemic. Otherwise, if you are able to be in person, you can submit a speaker form to voice your public comment. Alrighty, and I'm gonna, yes, so let's see, of other questions, and please, I know it's on the next slide, for anybody who does have announcements, I know we are almost at 8. If you have some announcements, I'm gonna try to take a look and see if there was any open questions. Good question from Niva with regards to, was the Board of Supervisors expanding the overview or the purview of the Office of Independent Review just performative? It does have an effect in that it has included, because of the fact that like the district attorney has been under scrutiny with regards to how they conduct, what is their policies. And Daisy, I'm not sure if you also have additional information with regards to this, but I know that by expanding it, it does at least bring that review and accountability to these other departments who didn't have it before. The only problem is the fact that the Office of Independent Review doesn't have subpoena power and doesn't have enough funding to be staffed properly. If it was actually staffed properly and had subpoena power, then we would want the Sheriff's Department, the DA, the Probation Department, all of these people to be held accountable as a community, that they should be taking care of the people in their custody.
Definitely. The one thing I'd add to that is that I think the creation of the office in and of itself back in 2008 was very performative. The executive director at the time was tasked with publishing, I think it was quarterly reports. And I mean, like, those reports were a complete joke. And again, right, the fact that the BOS really gets to dictate the direction of the office is also problematic, right? And so there's also like the politics of it all, like with the current executive director. Like, I think that there is an intention and a commitment to changing things, but there's only so much that he can do without exposing the BOS getting rid of him, because they get to hire and fire whoever they'd like. But the short answer is yes, that I think in many ways it was performative.
Thank you for that. And I know we have, please keep adding your questions. For anybody who we might have missed your question, we will follow up in our follow-up email to make sure that those are accounted for. Let's see. In terms of jail and OCSD funding, are those labor negotiations already happening in preparation for the budget meeting? Daisy, are you aware of this?
I kind of, what was it? Was it specific to the contracts with labor negotiations?
Yeah, with jail and OCSD funding, if those labor negotiations have already happened.
I think that a lot of that is like ongoing. I know, and we'll get into the specifics during workshop number 4, which is going to focus on the budget. Like in previous years, the Board of Supervisors have granted significant pay raises to the Board of Supervisors. And that has typically, it doesn't need to necessarily happen before the budget hearings, which are coming up on 9/1 and 9/2. There's also times throughout the year where departments and agencies can go back before the board and request adjustments to their budget. And more often than not, those adjustment requests tend to be augmentation requests. And OCSD in the past has gone back to the board and requested more money after they've overrun their initial budget. So that's something that we want to stay on top of and recognize that budget advocacy is going to be a year-long process that will be beyond the hearings.
So stay tuned. We're going to be providing some more information about budget, as well as if you take a look at the People's Budget OC, there is a way to get involved with regards to this long-term planning, because this does take time, and that we can only influence so much in the short period. So planning for these future times is what's needed. So coming up, thank you so much for everybody joining us for this workshop 1, kicking off our Reimagine Justice and OC workshop series. So we'll be continuing next week, Thursday, and covering the Orange County jails expansion. We have some awesome speakers for you that are going to be discussing conditions in jail, firsthand experience. So stay tuned. Also, for anybody who put their questions, we will be sending a follow-up email with the recording, with the slides. It may take a day or 2 just as we need to do some editing and things like that. So keep an eye out. It will be coming soon, but we'll make sure to send that out. And then, last but not least, if you can donate, we are offering these for free. We want everybody to know this information. We greatly appreciate your time and capacity for being here and wanting to learn more, as well as just sharing the space with us. So we greatly appreciate it. If you are able to contribute, please donate. The contributions are going to the speakers that are going to go across all of the workshops. So we're going to take all the funds and split them equally. This includes people with expertise, people with firsthand experience, as well as we're going to have some artists. So stay tuned. There's actually an exciting announcement that will be coming out soon with regards to a virtual concert that we are excited about. That's getting planned, and so we'll be announcing that very soon. And thank you all so much. Feel free to keep entering any questions into the chat. Anything else you may need, but otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful night. Once again, thank you so much to Jessica and Daisy for sharing your knowledge and time with us today.